All right, Erin, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right, let me know when it's visible.
Yep, there we go.
We're good? All right. Let's see. So this is sort of part two. What we had tried to do once and had technical issues with was a single session on including students with Angelman in the regular classroom and what their literacy instruction would look like. We ended up separating that because we just need to re-record it anyway, so we just did an hour on school inclusion for our kids with Angelman, and now we're looking at what literacy instruction looks like in that regular classroom for them. As we go through, just know that the webinar that follows this one, which we're recording tomorrow, will take some of these pieces and put them all together, because when we actually go to support our kids' communication, that's where you'll really see how all these different threads of supporting reading and writing and everything else in the inclusive classroom kind of all comes together. So if you're left with questions after this one, hopefully we'll address those a bit better in the subsequent webinar. You guys may have just seen the slide already in the last webinar, but this is my daughter Maggie. She's 11. She has deletion positive Angelman syndrome, and when she was about 7. I went back to school and got my graduate degree in education, looking at how to include her in school, to better include her in school, because she's been in an inclusive classroom or an inclusive setting all the way from the beginning, from her infant child care until now. She's in a regular grade 6 classroom. She attends a school now with the same students that she started with what we call junior kindergarten when she was 4, so it's very many of the same classmates. But what I encountered as she got older was that her instruction was just completely diverging from what was happening in the regular classroom, and she did not seem to be very engaged. By the end of grade 2, well into grade 3, it just seemed like she was included, but we weren't sure that she was learning. And when I went back to school to figure out how to better include her, what I just came up with was that we really had to focus on her literacy instruction. Something I have heard many, many times from many, many people and professionals and professors and all kinds of people is it even realistic to work on literacy with students with Angelman syndrome? And we're going to talk about that first. If you've seen any of my webinars, you have seen this slide. But what it does is it looks at the research around how oral and written language develops in all of us. And we used to believe that there was sort of this ladder where first students learned how to listen, first as babies. You know, a newborn baby learns how to listen. And then once we've been able to make sense of the sounds and the words spoken around us, then we start learning how to talk. And so there was this concept that we went from listening to talking, and then kids are learning how to talk from maybe age 1, age 2 until they start school, and around age 5 or 6 they start going up the next rung of the ladder, which is to start learning reading. And then writing is sort of the epitome, sort of the top of the ladder, that there was this developmental progression. And what we know now is that that's simply not true, that from the moment we're born, maybe even from before we're born, we're already developing our listening skills. And as we learn how to interpret and make sense of all these sounds we hear around us, we're actually using that to develop our own expressive communication, that everything we're listening to, everything we're observing is the basis of what we're going to be able to express. And we'll talk about that a little more in depth with the subsequent webinar, talking about supporting our kids' communication in the classroom. We know that as we are learning how to listen, how to make sense of what we hear, we're actually also developing the skills that we need for reading, because reading is really a process of being able to understand symbols and stories being used by other people and being able to make sense of them. And as we're learning how to make sense of how other people communicate with us, we're learning how to communicate back. And we're learning how to communicate back also using some kind of symbolic expressions. So talking is a symbol. Symbols that we point to, obviously, are symbols. Using photographs is a symbolic form, a sign of how we communicate and share our own stories back. And so the ability to make sense of someone else's story is directly related to being able to share your own. The ability to hear someone else's experience is directly related to the ability to empathize with it and apply it to your own life. So all of this develops simultaneously. Our kids with Angelman are generally at a very early, or what we call emergent level of literacy. So they're still learning to make sense of the stories of others. They're still learning to find meaning in all their own experiences and to share their experiences with other people. They're still learning to communicate the thoughts in their heads with some kind of graphic symbols so that we can understand it. And they're still learning to interpret graphic symbols such as words and signs and symbols used by other people. They're still learning to interpret the symbols of other people. And to me, what's kind of the most important part of emergent literacy is learning that that's all worth it, that it's joyful, that it's fun, that it's engaging to use printed language, to use symbols, that there is a reason why we want to take the time and go to all the hard work of learning how to understand someone else's stories, learn how to understand the words and written words that other people use, and that it's there's meaning and joy in engaging with it so that you can express it back. But that's really the stage of literacy that our students with Angelman are at. And in fact, I mean, so Maggie's in grade 6, she's 11, she had friends over here over the Christmas break, and they were driving me crazy, and I was like, you know, girls, go find something to do, you know, go find a book to read, for heaven's sake. And two of her friends were like, what? School is out. Why would we read? They were baffled at the idea that we would read for fun. Baffled. That is work that happens at school. That's not something that we derive joy from. And I remember thinking, oh, well, then Maggie's not the only one in this house who's at an emergent level of literacy, because somehow these two friends of hers, they're typical, they go to a regular classroom and do regular classroom work. They have not learned to find that joy from engagement with printed language. These are some of the researchers who will talk about all the ways, whose work really speaks to all the ways in which developing literacy skills is just inherently a very functional skill for our kids, that it enhances their ability to communicate, to engage socially, and to be more independent. And we talked in the previous webinar as well, so I won't spend much time on it, but as we're developing our kids' literacy skills, we are addressing all of the universal needs of Maslow's hierarchy. So when our kids can learn to become literate, when they can learn to engage with text and use symbols, they're going to be safer. They are better able to meet their own needs, to get food and water when they're hungry and thirsty, to get warmth when they're cold, to be safe, to be able to communicate if something is wrong so that other people can help them and improve it. They're learning how to feel a sense of belonging by sharing their story with others and being able to really interact with their family members and their friends. I mean, when I look at students with Angelman, I so often see kids who so desperately want to interact on a deeper level with the people around them, and that's what we're working on when we're working on literacy. Ideally, we're also developing their self-esteem, teaching them how effective they can be. Ideally, as they're learning to become literate, to use these signs and symbols and interpret them from others, you know, they're really beginning to recognize their own strengths, their own learning, to feel self-respect, and to find a way to really express their own creativity. Literacy at this emergent level is what Chris Cleaver calls an invitation. He refers to this literacy flow, that all of us as adults, we don't even realize all the ways that we're literate. We don't think about it when we're reading a newspaper, or checking our Facebook status update, or, you know, updating one, or, you know, liking things on Facebook, or sending someone a text message, or writing out a grocery list, or paying bills. That's the literacy flow. It's all these ordinary things we do that require literacy for us to be part of it. And if we look at typically developing kids, really, really little kids, not even a year old, are already observing all the literacy happening around them and going, I want a piece of that, right? And you'll see little babies pick up crayons, you know, a 12-month-old, maybe try to pick up crayons, maybe try to mouth it, but then reach down and make a mark because they've observed this and they want to be part of it. When we talk about emergent literacy instruction, we're really talking about how we invite our kids in. You know, this invitation is not sitting down with flashcards and saying, touch the letter A, show me the letter A, because that's not appropriate at this emergent level. What we're doing is making sure that our kids can access all the typical literacy experiences that that kids have at that emergent stage that actually lead to the motivation and the knowledge so that they can develop more conventional skills of reading and writing. Emergent literacy is that phase from birth. Some say it even starts before birth, that stage from birth until kids start school, where they are learning and concluding all these things about literacy. We know that students with significant disabilities have dramatically reduced opportunities and experiences that lead to literacy in their typical peers. We know that the nature of their disability creates these barriers to being able to do it. So for example, if a child has a visual impairment or a visual processing issue, they might not even see all the ways that people around them are reading and writing. If they struggle with their auditory processing, they may not be able to make sense of the spoken language around them. It may be that spoken words just kind of pass by too fast for them to be able to unravel them and make sense of them. So there's all these barriers created by their disability. And that just leads to them having fewer opportunities, which means that when our kids with Angelman start school, they might start school in an inclusive classroom, and they are still working on the earliest levels of knowledge about literacy, such as that there are these things called books, and they're really exciting. There's actually some great things inside them, and they have a thing called a cover with a title, and then they have these things called sentences inside on these things called pages, and the sentences are made up of words which are formed by letters. That might be the stage that some of our kids are at when they start school, that they are still learning these really early concepts about books, and that's fine. What we're doing is figuring out what they know, and we're moving them forward, but those are all emergent literacy understandings. Key emergent understandings is when the child decides for herself that she is a reader, that she is a writer. You know, I would say Maggie was about 9 when she really, we'd been working on her literacy instruction for about a year when you saw that shift where she went, I'm a writer. And in fact, yesterday she actually took a black Sharpie and wrote all over a living room wall. The funny thing about it was she actually signed it. Maggie's developed, she can write the letter M, and she has several M's in her drawing with a Sharpie on our living room wall. That is completely developmentally appropriate. That is the kind of thing that an emergent writer does when she has come to identify as herself a writer. We are developing in our kids the ability, that understanding that they can share their thoughts and their stories using something symbolic. So their typical peers, maybe their typical siblings, had it much easier because they learned that they could share their thoughts and stories using spoken words, and our kids haven't. They have to make a much bigger leap to understanding that they can use a different form of symbolic expression, that they can use something like visual symbols. But that's the kind of conclusion, whatever we do for our kids in the inclusive classroom, in any form of literacy instruction, what we want them to conclude is that they can read, that they can write, that they can share their thoughts, that they can participate in interactions with the people around them, that they have a really good story to tell, that books are wonderful, and that books provide information that they really want to learn. They're learning that text carries meaning, that when you open up a book and look at the page, there's pictures and there's words, and the meaning is actually in the words, not in the pictures. We know that kids with communication disabilities are given photographs and symbols so much that when it comes to their book knowledge, they often assume it's actually the pictures that have the meaning, because we've taught them that. We've given them pictures and said if you want to communicate, use this picture, use this this graphic symbol, this illustration. So it's not surprising that our kids need some extra instruction to realize that there's words on the page and the meaning is in the words. Our kids might be learning that the printed words represent the words that we're speaking. They might not realize at first when we read the words on a page that the words we speak are the words that the child can actually see. They're learning that spoken words, if I just say something, the words come and go because spoken language is actually very fleeting. But the power of the written word is that it sticks around. It can be shared across time and space. So I can share a message with someone who's not in the same room with me if I write it down. I can share a message with someone in the future because I can write something now and I can mail it to them. I can send a message to someone all the way on the other side of the world in a way that I can't with spoken language. So we want our kids to be learning that kind of lesson. Our kids are learning that sentences are made up of words, that words are made up of letters, and that we can take those letters and arrange them to spell words, and we can rearrange them to spell other words. You know, the alphabet is a symbol system of 26 symbols, and look at how much we can express with it. That's the kind of thing that kids are learning. They're learning that they can recognize words. One of the first stages, developmental stages that kids go through as they really start to consolidate their emergent literacy understanding is that ability to realize, oh my gosh, that printed word, that's my name. I can recognize that, because if kids learn that they can recognize a word, what they've actually learned is that they can recognize words, and now they start seeing other written words as a challenge that they actually could potentially understand. So there's this huge developmental stage of realizing that you know what words are and that you know some words, that you can recognize them. There's another really important developmental stage of realizing that you can write words so that you can scribble. So think about all the times you've seen little kids scribbling all over everything they can possibly get their hands on, including with Sharpies on my living room walls. They're realizing they can write words. That's that moment when they've written something for the first time that someone else understood. That's a really, really important developmental stage, and that's the kind of understanding that we're helping to teach with our literacy instruction. We're also, I don't see it here, but we're also developing think about all the little kids you've seen who try to read you a book. They tell you that they can read. They read a book to you, but they actually can't read yet. They've just memorized it because they've read it so many times. There's this really key understanding that kids develop when they believe they can read, even though they're just pretend reading. It's what develops this internal identity that I am a reader. I can participate in this too. I am part of that literacy flow. And we're going to support our kids with Angelman to learn to pretend read before they actually learn to read, because of the way that we're going to give them lots of exposure to the same text. And for our kids with Angelman, really the key understanding that we're hoping to develop is that I can express the thoughts that no one knows I am having. That is the root of emergent literacy. That is the root of literacy. When we talk about literacy instruction, this is the key understanding that we need our kids to have. And this is why literacy is so closely tied to communication and to language, right? It's all so intertwined. Emergent literacy develops through all these different opportunities. So we see all the people around us using print, using language, reading newspapers, sending text messages, writing a grocery list, and we go, there's all these authentic reasons that's an important thing to do. So we're observing it, and then we want to imitate it. And you'll see that in kids of all ages as maybe they see mom sending a text message, so they steal her cell phone and they type in a whole bunch of characters so that they can feel like they're sending a text message too. They see mom writing a grocery list, and so they take a piece of paper and a crayon and they make those scribbling lines across the page and they say, see, I wrote a grocery list too, even though nobody can see it. They pick up a book and they turn the pages, and maybe the book is upside down and backward, front, whatever, but they say, see, I can read too. So that's all that exploration of all the same literacy tools that they see people around them using. David Copenhaver and his colleague Yoder, his mentor Yoder, talk about creating these literacy need-provoking experiences. That's really what we're trying to do. So it's that moment of, I need to share an idea. I need to be able to write it down. I need a symbol to express it. Gosh, I wish I could read what that written word says. This book looks really good. I need to be able to read it. There's something I want to learn more about. I need to be able to read text. That what school should be for our kids with Angelman is just all of these literacy need-provoking experiences so that they are self-motivated to develop their literacy skills. So, is it realistic to work on literacy for students with Angelman? Absolutely. At the very least, what we need to be trying to do is remove the barriers to their literacy development. We know that students with significant disabilities are typically not considered potentially literate. And if we look at the kinds of literacy instruction that we provide to students with significant disability, it is rarely the same kind of comprehensive instruction that we know is necessary for their peers who don't have disabilities. The Browder et al. Article from 2009, the Erickson et al. Article from 2009 are both really detailed studies of the literature about what we do to develop literacy in students with significant disability. We usually focus on sight word recognition, and what we do to develop literacy in all their typical peers, and how we so often don't provide for our students with something like Angelman all the same instruction that we provide to their peers, and yet we know it's essential for their peers. We know that when we provide this comprehensive instruction, our students with significant disability make much greater gains in their literacy than if we just try to get them to recognize some sight words. So, students with significant disabilities rarely receive comprehensive literacy instruction. They're not imagined as potentially literate. Their literacy instruction is usually very narrowly defined. We're trying to get them to identify letters, trying to get them to recognize words. They might be included in their classroom for various forms of experiences, but not actually for the instruction. So they're not actually, they may not actually be accessing the same instruction. So for example, I was in one class where the kids were in a circle. They were in like a leveled reading group. All the kids are reading a sentence out loud, and every page had a short sentence on it, so as you turn the page, it's the next student's turn to read. The student with Angelman had been provided with a Big Mac where someone had already recorded the sentence. So her job, when the book came to her and it was her turn to read, and I'm using little air quotes here, she was just supposed to hit the Big Mac button. She was being included in the experience of sitting in a leveled reading group, but she actually wasn't being included in the instruction. There was really no cognitive connection between the words on the page and smacking that Big Mac button. There was no requirement for her to even look at the words on the page before she hit the Big Mac button. We had no idea if she knew that hitting the Big Mac button and playing this recorded sentence represented the words that were on the page as we came to her. So she was being included in an experience, but not actually in the same instruction. And we know that literacy development in our students with Angelman really stalls because of their lack of expressive language. We can't move them forward unless we're also supporting their expressive communication, which is why in the next webinar you'll see how we can kind of bring it all together, combining their literacy instruction with their communication support so that we can overcome that barrier. But what what Diane Browder and Karen Erickson, both huge scholars in their fields, have both concluded is that we cannot prejudge which students can learn how to read. All we can do is provide comprehensive literacy instruction to all students, and through the course of providing instruction, we'll find out which students can succeed. But we do have students with Angelman who are learning how to decode and encode words. So conventional literacy is possible for many of our kids. We just don't know which ones. And if we're really doing quality literacy instruction, if we have students who never learn how to read and write, but they learn that they have a good story to tell, they learn that they can interact with other people, they learn that books are this source of joy and knowledge and information. Maybe they never learn how to read books, but they learn to listen to audiobooks or text-to-speech. Maybe they learn to communicate just with the symbol set of a communication system and not with the alphabet. Maybe all they learn is that to associate letters with really important things so that they can sign drink and then indicate the letter L, and the people who know them can say, oh, you're thirsty, you want something that starts with L, well, let's see, what could that be? Are you asking for lemonade? If that's all our kids learn, we can live with that. There is so much that we can keep growing on, and our kids are lifelong learners, so if they don't learn conventional literacy in school, then we can pick it up as adults. And in fact, it's many of our adult learners are actually making the biggest gain. So, but we have to problem solve the barriers, because simply putting a child with Angelman in the classroom, in a general education classroom where literacy is being taught, does not mean that that child can access it. Our kids don't have oral language most of the time. They have significant difficulties with their fine motor skills and with their motor planning and with their gross motor. So they have an idea of what they want to do in their head, and they may not be able to organize their hands to actually go do it, to organize their body to go do it. They might be thinking about nodding their head, but instead they rock their shoulders. That's all a motor planning deficit. They might be thinking about writing, but the palms of their hands are so sensitive that they can't even bear to hold a marker. That's the kind of barrier that our kids are dealing with. They might really struggle with attention, and we might have to make things really personally meaningful. They might have huge problems with their vision. Many of our kids with Angelman really struggle to organize the visual information that they see. Their brains are just taking in too much of everything around them, and so it's harder for them to focus on what really matters. And they might really be struggling with their auditory processing. Some of our kids with Angelman, most of our kids with Angelman have really strong receptive understanding. It's just really clear while you're around them. They're understanding what you say. They just usually can't kind of communicate it back. But some of our kids have disrupted auditory processing. So it's kind of like what they're hearing that we all say is taking too long for their brain to make sense of. Maybe our voices are blurring into the sounds, all the other sounds in their environment, and their brain just really struggles to isolate spoken language from all the other sounds. And for some of our kids, it's just even the sound that fluorescent lights make creates this background noise that their brain perceives as much louder and makes it harder for them to process language. So our kids with Angelman have all of these access barriers to really being able to access literacy instruction. And they have huge opportunity barriers. We know that a child who does not speak is actually spoken to less. They have less language exposure than their typical peers. When our kids are in separate classrooms, we know from the research that less language is used in those classrooms, that a smaller vocabulary is used, and so that can also have an effect on their language development. Our kids, if they can't speak, have very few models of communication that they can observe, that they can make sense of, that they can try to imitate and try to express. So if we want our kids to be able to communicate, we have to use the symbols that they can observe us using, that they can imitate, explore, and one day use. If we want our kids to be able to write, but they can't write by holding a pencil, maybe they need to write using some kind of alternative pencil, such as a keyboard. They need to have models of how we write that way so that they can observe that and experiment with it the same way. as other kids do. We know their kids with Angelman have fewer ordinary kid activities. They spend, a hugely disproportionate amount of time in doctor's appointments and just trying to get seizure control, and maybe with feeding difficulties and therapy appointments. And so they just don't have the same opportunities that lead to literacy in their typical peers. We know that children with significant disabilities are read to less, particularly if their kids are like mine. I mean, when Maggie was little, actually even now today, if I started reading to her, she would leave the room. I mean, it seemed painful to her for me to read to her. We know that when kids can't respond to text, so if they don't have language to be able to say, hey, I like that, hey, read this again, that we actually end up reading to them less and we interact with them less. So opportunity barriers just refers to the ways that all of us change our behavior because the child has Angelman. It's actually separate from their own disabilities. It's how we change our own behavior in response. So we really have to figure out the solutions for that opportunity barrier, such as creating communication systems with a robust vocabulary, such as making sure that we are communicating and reading and writing in a way that they can observe and imitate and explore and express. Such as using a symbol system to talk to them, that we are providing the instruction, providing more intensively the instruction that they need so that they can experience more of that we're providing the assistive technology, and that we're really providing enhanced experiences of literacy because they haven't had as many. So we need to maximize their experiences of that whole literacy need provoking kind of thing, right? Our kids need to be confronted with all of these ways in which they wish they could read and write more, and then scaffold so that they can. And we can see the access and opportunity barriers when we do assessments on our kids. So some of the best emergent literacy assessments that are out there, so these have all been published and researched. The Bridge Observational Rating Scale takes a look at all the literacy behaviors of preschool children before they start school to see kind of what level of kindergarten readiness they have. The Stogler Literacy Rubric is this really nice snapshot of reading skills. The Developmental Writing Scale, kind of, it's about a 20-point scale that shows how writing develops from kind of making that first mark on paper to starting to form letters to starting to form words, etc. And when we look at these kinds of assessments, such as the Bridge, what we see is that our kids with Angelman develop right along until the point at which their motor skills or their lack of oral language gets in the way. So, for example, we did just a survey of parents, of 700 parents, and actually some teachers of students with Angelman, and found that most kids with Angelman are exploring books. They're browsing the book pages. But then you can really see where the fine motor disability picks up, because some kids can't do that nice isolated picture grasp to pick up a page of a book and actually turn the page. They make these much kind of grosser movements. They're sort of just general swiping things, so they're constantly flipping back in books. And they can't start making that independent, steady book pages until they're provided with something like a digital book, or until they're provided with more accessible books that don't require so many fine motor demands. But for example, most parents report that their child with Angelman clearly recognizes books by their cover, which is sort of the stage 6 on the Bridge for book knowledge, and yet don't turn pages appropriately or don't make independent study of book pages. And that's all a function, much of the time, of the fine motor delay, more so than the cognitive. The only way we can know is if we provide them with physically accessible books, such as a digital book being read aloud on an iPad or on a computer screen, or a physically adapted book that compensates for the fine motor delays. When we look at how typical kids interact with print, that starts with being able to communicate a choice of a story, using a picture, a symbol, a word, some kind of object. And we see right away kids with Angelman, already so many of them not even getting to that stage because they don't have an accessible symbol with which to communicate a choice of story, right? I mean, if our children don't have a communication system or don't have a picture for every single book that they might want to read, some kind of picture for every single song that they might want to sing, then they don't even have access to the first stage of developing how they interact with print, that kind of thing. So the bridge scale, there's a whole, the ASF and we did this whole webinar on this, I think last spring. So it'd be on their session. I go into much more depth on each of these, but the bridge is just a really beautiful scale. So take a look at what the child is currently doing, really inventory their skills and their understandings right now and figure out what the next step is. And so often what you'll see is that developmentally the next step for them is we first need to compensate for their access barriers. We first need to figure out where their fine motor skills or their language skills are, what is interrupting their development. So compensate for that first, and then we can see if actually cognitively they understand something like the front to back progression of pages in a book. We might find out that they cognitively understand it because when we give them a digital book, they go from front to back attending to the whole thing, but when we give them a paper-based book that requires fine motor skills, they just sort of jump all around. So this is the bridge. It's a beautiful tool. Check out that other webinar. This is Kathy Stogler's literacy rubric. You can see the little URL down at the bottom where it's available. Again, when we use this tool with our kids with Angelman, if you interpret where our kids are at, you will immediately see that their development on this reading rubric is directly related to their fine motor skills and their access skills and their oral language. That if they can't access something such as, let's look under fluency, shows beginning awareness of repetitive lines in story reading. So if we read, brown bear, what do you see? Many of our kids with Angelman are all excited. They know what's coming next. They've read this book so many times. Do they participate? That's the next stage with a repeated line during story reading. Can they predict or repeat the repeated lines? Well, if they don't have oral language, they can't do any of that. And so our kids get really stuck at the very beginning. And that's where we have to focus our instruction to move them forward. The developmental writing scale is just really lovely for how it describes how early writing develops in typical kids. So you'll see that what Janet Sturm has done here is she's listed all the different levels. I think she has I think it's about a 20-item scale, 20-level scale. And here's the first 7 steps of the developmental writing scale. So she provides her scoring criteria, her description of what kind of writing the child is doing, and then how to accommodate the child with disabilities, so that the child with Angelman, so that they can actually progress in their writing the same way that a typical child might. So for example, if we look under level 3, it's very typical as kids are developing writing skills that they start writing or typing strings of letters. So just any of you have ever gotten a text message from a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old where it was just random letters just crammed on, as though, you know, the more letters you select, the better, kind of thing. That is a developmentally typical writing stage. Janet assesses it as a level 3, and here's how we can help our kids with Angelman participate in that same developmental scale. Provide them with some kind of alphabet display, such as a paper letterboard where they can point to letters, provide them with access to a keyboard, see if their communication system has an alphabet page on it, etc. So if you look, I should have mentioned this earlier, the Don Johnston website, they've developed a whole writing curriculum and writing software based on this developmental writing scale, and they're doing a whole number of webinars around how to develop writing instruction for our students, such as our students with Angelman. So it's just a great resource. It's on the Don Johnston website. So emergent literacy instruction for our students with Angelman, what we're trying to do is remove their barriers to instruction. They're sitting in the classroom. We're trying to build a ramp so that they can actually access the instruction that we're providing. We're providing them as much opportunity for observing and imitating and exploring literacy as we possibly can. And what we're doing is developing the skills of listening comprehension, of vocabulary development, of alphabet knowledge. We're developing their phonemic and phonetic awareness, their expressive communication, and their writing. We'll get into, in the next webinar, more about how the writing and communication really all comes together. And so that will be the subsequent webinar for today. For the rest of this one, I'm much more focused on listening comprehension and reading, but you'll see how it all comes together tomorrow. We know from the research that inclusive classroom context and the general curriculum already provide a foundation of a balanced literacy approach, a comprehensive literacy approach. If we look at things such as the report of the National Reading Panel, what this national research showed that classrooms need to do is what general education classrooms are already doing. It's just what our kids with Angelman often can't access. This kind of comprehensive instruction is just providing all those opportunities to develop those emergent literacy understandings. And these are the skill areas that we're focused on. So self-expression and writing will be developed more, will be discussed more in the next session, but let's talk about listening comprehension, vocabulary development, and reading. Okay, so what we're trying to ask with our students with Angelman is how can, given the fact that they are appearing in their classrooms with very emergent literacy skills for the most part, so they're coming with only the earliest knowledge of literacy, and here's this general curriculum that's constantly changing, that's quite sophisticated. How can we use that curriculum to be the basis of their literacy instruction? And that has actually been kind of the most fascinating area for me to look at. We know that in the absence of the general curriculum, it's really easy to reduce literacy to recognizing words, to making flashcards, to instruction such as show me A, point to A, prove to me you know the letter A, and then I'm going to start teaching you B. And kind of doing this sort of drill and response, because without the general curriculum as the basis, we find ourselves really focused on the mechanics. But if we look at the general curriculum as the basis of what we're exploring, what we're interacting with, what we're reading about, what we're writing about, what we're talking about, then we can actually provide our kids with Angelman much more repetition of ideas, of instruction. So we can provide them lots of repetition, but with a constantly changing content, so that it doesn't just become repetitive drill. The best curriculum that I've seen, again, I'm referencing Don Johnston, is their Start to Finish Literacy Starter Series. It's really excellent. So you can see at the bottom of the page, these are sets of books that are really kind of set up as leveled readers, and we'll talk about the different levels of text in a minute. But so imagine completely age-respectful, age-considerate texts for our kids. So those first books that we introduce to children to read, but that are appropriate for much older kids to read, right? Because I don't know how many classrooms I've been in where the child with Angelman is still being provided with those, you know, the cat sat on the mat with the rat and ate its hat kind of book. That we might provide typical kindergartners. This is a set of readers that are interesting, and they're on really age-respectful topics. It comes with a whole phonics program. You can see here on the slide where it talks about making words, and it's all this alphabet and word study instruction. They're scripted lessons that that can be delegated to a paraprofessional to do as a lesson in the class. It's very familiar to any gen ed teacher who will recognize all the making words activities that happen, and there's reading comprehension lessons, part of the curriculum. So as you're reading those leveled readers that you see down at the bottom, you've also got a whole bunch of ideas about how to base the book in what the child already knows, and all these reading comprehension exercises to really deepen their engagement with the text and then help them extend the knowledge that they gain from it. So just a really beautiful series that's working quite well for a whole number of our kids. Our kids with Angelman need lots of books, and if they're not interested in the regular books that are in their classroom, then we need to provide them with books that they find interesting. We know that in a regular classroom, we need to plan for between 20 to 40 books per kid, because let's say you've got 30 kids in the class. My math isn't very good. 30 times, say, 40 is what, 1,200 books? That's actually the size of classroom library that if a classroom has that many books, the research shows that the most highly effective first grade teachers actually have over 1,000 books in their classroom, because it takes that many books for a lot of kids to find the books that really develop their passion for reading. Our kids with Angelman might be much older in a typical classroom. They need lots of books too, and the books that are already in their class might not be accessible, might not be something that they can read with comprehension yet, that they can even listen to yet. So we have to figure out how to provide them lots of books. Remnant books, which we talked a bit about in the last session. And I'll show you some examples of. These are for our kids who are the most tangible, who need really concrete representations of things they've done. So I'll give you some examples, but maybe they've gone to the movies. We're going to put the movie ticket, we're going to put the popcorn bag, and we're going to put a sentence about the movie that they saw in a remnant book, so that when they see that popcorn bag and when they smell the popcorn from the popcorn bag, they can really relive that experience of going to the movies. We need to provide them with books about their personal experiences. So maybe they rode the roller coasters at Canada's Wonderland last year. Maybe they went to Disneyland. The more books they have about the things they have done, the more that we can not only kind of help them consolidate their memories, but actually provide the basis for them to have a book that's really exciting to read and also really exciting to share. We can make them alphabet books about all their favorite people. So it's so easy to make alphabet books about each member of the family. A is for Andrew, B is for Becky, about the places they like to go. So M is for McDonald's, T is for Taco Bell. All of their favorite things. I is for iPad. All of their, an alphabet book about all of their classmates. So C is for Callum. We can make it even more complicated and have it be C is for Callum. Callum loves cars. And just provide more detail about their kids in the class. These are the kind of books that kids with Angelman who otherwise aren't showing a lot of engagement with books tend to be the most interested in. So if they haven't yet shown interest in the regular books in their classroom, then these are the kind of things that we start to provide them. We can really reinforce and repeat all of our alphabet instruction by, for example, with the curriculum, we're studying butterflies, then we make them an alphabet book about the curriculum. So C is for caterpillar, E is for egg, B is for butterfly. When Maggie studied Egypt, E is for Egypt, C is for canopic jar. I'll show you the website Tar Heel Reader. There's beginning books of all levels there. And what we'll talk about tomorrow is a lot about predictable chart writing books. These are books we write with children using their communication system so that they're learning their communication system at the same time that they're actually learning how to write books and therefore read books. It's just a really beautiful process. So our kids with Angelman need lots of books. This is the kind of personal experience book, or an I am book, an all about me book. I am a best friend. I hug and kiss my best friends. These are quite simple to make these days now that we have iPads of photo albums and apps like Pictello that can read the book to them, apps like Keynote, PowerPoint. They're just really simple books. We can make them on the iPad, and we can also print them out, laminate them, and provide them so they've got both a digital copy and a paper copy. And our kids with Angelman usually they seem to prefer, having these books in multiple formats. So we can repeat their exposure to text with the same book by just providing the book in multiple formats. We can really highlight their personal interests. I mean, I have to give Justin Bieber credit for getting Maggie interested in books because she loved Justin Bieber back in grade 2, grade 3, and it's really what got me thinking about her literacy. And the only books that she showed interest in then were these Justin Bieber books. So she takes them to class and all the girls would gather around at recess and they'd all exclaim over Justin Bieber, and Maggie became very attached to those books. Yeah, so personal experience books so that they can read about the things they've done, share it with other kids. Pictello is a gorgeous app that actually even allows us to put video on the pages. So the book can be read back to the child. They can read all their books right on their iPad. You can make it on an iPod, on an iPhone. It has text-to-speech, really high-quality text-to-speech. So the electronic voices are the same ones that are in apps such as Proloquo, the communication app, or Touch Chat. Really high-quality voices recorded by real-life children, so they have expression. They can read their books out loud using the same voices that they might use in their communication system. And we can even, lots of photos, and we can include videos on the page. So if the child went on a roller coaster and loved that experience, they can read a book and write a book about going on the roller coaster and then actually share a video of how exciting that was. So whatever their experiences are, whatever their favorite things are. I mean, one of the most popular kinds of books to write with our kids is alphabet books about all their favorite foods, right? And this also starts to foster conversation about foods. I like bananas. B is for bananas. I like bananas. A is for apples. I like to eat apples. So that we're providing them photos of their favorite foods. We're providing alphabet instruction, but we're also talking about foods and not just requesting foods. And then we can use these alphabet books when we're making a grocery list, when we're planning a menu. We can say, oh, you want apples. Hey, let's look at your book there. Where does it say apples? We need to find the word so we can write our grocery list. Oh, look, I see the word apples. It starts with an A. Do you see the A? I'm writing it down. A-P-P-L-E-S. I've written that down. Now we can go to the grocery store and get apples. We can use apps like Pictello for oral language presentations. So when Maggie's class had to build a robot and then present to the class how they built it and what the function of the robot was, we just made the whole thing right on her iPod or iPad in the app Pictello. We can provide, there's so many storytelling apps that we can put on our kids' iPads that read aloud, and our kids can use this. So for example, when Maggie was a third grade reading buddy to a kindergartner, she brought her Dr. Seuss apps and read them aloud with her kindergarten reading buddy. These are just some beautiful examples of Riley's Remnant books. I love this page with the dentist because so the Remnant book is that kind of personal experience book. It's where we give kids that really kind of concrete representation of something that they did. And you can see here that she went to the dentist, and what is more memorable about the dentist than the taste of that latex glove in your mouth? Well, she's got the glove right there in her Remnant book. We can make them, so these are personal experience books. Notice the repeated line. When I was a baby, I liked to wear hats. When I was a baby, I liked to look in the mirrors, right? This is the kind of really simple book that tends to engage our kids more than many other books do. This is an example of some pages we made from a predictable chart writing activity where we're using a repeated line. I see a cake. I see a girl. We'll talk about this more in the next session about communication support, but we actually used the child's communication system for a small group of kids to all write a different page in the book so that the child with Angelman not only participated in writing the book, but has a personal association with each page in the book, so knows that it's her, her friend Ella, who said, I see a cat. And we usually have the child's name on the page. We can make all kinds of simple books, such as an I Love book. I love Ava and Mia at the park. I love Dina at the Jelly Belly factory. If you notice that each family member is finishing the sentence on their own. So here's Ava's page. Here's her sister's page. I love Papa at the playground. We can laminate these books if we need to make them really durable for our kids. But these are the kinds of books that tend to be highly engaging for our kids who haven't yet developed that interest in other books. So in I play, this is a great example of predictable chart writing. So I play, and each family member in this case has finished the sentence, I play, and found a photo to go with it. I play trains. A bunny can. So we can see that this is a predictable chart writing book made with these 4 people. A bunny can hop. A bunny can stretch. A bunny can crawl. A bunny can wiggle. A bunny can run. This is an adapted book we made for a little boy where they were studying the human rights leader Wangari and her work on deforestation. So how can we make this topic really tangible and interesting to our student with Angelman? Well, we might start with things like defining the key words we're going to use, like soil. Here's the word, here's a photo, and here's a baggie of actual soil that we can put into a tangible book. Soil grows plants. Wangari plants trees. We had all these repeated lines and put real live things from the school grounds into the book. I can plant seeds. I can protect soil. So we're making a direct connection to what we're learning about in terms of deforestation and how to prevent deforestation, but we're making a real direct connection to our student himself. Tar Heel Reader, if you haven't discovered it yet, it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's got over 30,000 books. These are books written by special educators for the most part and special education students. They are written on so many different topics. So you can do a search for trains. You can do a search for Justin Bieber. You could do a search for alphabet books, letter books. There are just so many beautiful books in Tar Heel Reader. They are all free. You can read them right on the website. They have text-to-speech to support. You can download them as PowerPoints. You can download them and edit them as a PowerPoint. You can download them and look at them on an iPad using the app Keynote or iBooks. If you download them directly into iBooks, then the child can just read them right on their iPad and still have the text-to-speech support. But it's just a really easy place to go to find a lot of books. Here's an H book. This is an example of a Tar Heel Reader book. So Jane Farrell's books. If you just search for Jane as an author in Tar Heel Reader, she's just brilliant. She's a speech-language pathologist who makes these books. This is one of the most engaging books that I found for a number of our kids, where the book's called I Am H. And so she's finishing each sentence with this repeated line of, if I am H, I am hot, I am hairy, I am horrible. And the kinds of things we want to do with these books to get our kids engaged, if they're not already interested in books, then we do things like go, I am hot. Oh, I am hot. Look at that picture. It's so hot. Are you hot? I am horrible. Oh, that's so disgusting. We can scream. We can drop the book. We can say, oh, that was just so nasty. That spider was horrible. I think the spider is horrible. And so many of our kids with Angelman who might not otherwise pay attention to reading yet see that reaction and go, well, that was hilarious. I am hilarious. There we go, another H word. And suddenly start getting engaged with books. I think it may have been this book, but Maggie has a very old friend she's been with since kindergarten named Ella, who likes to read with her in class. And Ella despises spiders, and Maggie had selected a book that had a spider. I think it was this one. And Ella just freaked out. She just hated the spider picture. Well, you can bet that for the next month, Maggie went out of her way as many times as possible to find this book, to bring it to Ella and request her to read it, because she so loved that very authentic reaction to the spider picture, right? So this is just how we get our kids really paying attention to books. The kind of goals we have is that our kids are choosing books, that they're starting to attend. In the beginning, we might have a goal that for 10 seconds, they'll attend to a text that they have chosen, that they'll start making silent study of books, that we'll see them turning the pages and really looking at the pages. And we can really observe their hand movements, their eye gaze, their nodding, where they're pointing, how they're turning pages, to get a sense of what they're doing with the books, the meaning that they're making, and how they're developing developing more sophisticated reading skills. What we need our teachers to do is really make sure that the students' interests are represented in the books in the classroom. So, we need to be thinking about how to provide dozens of books to our children with Angelman to make sure that we're providing enough, that they have a large enough variety that they can find the books that really speak to them. We need to make sure that they're at an appropriate level of difficulty. So, for example, some books are so visually busy that our children who struggle with their visual processing, who just can't take in all that visual clutter, aren't interested. So you'll see that many of the books we make are actually very visually simple, right? We're trying to figure out how to reduce that visual complexity so that they're more accessible. And we need to have multiple levels of difficulty, and I think in just a minute we're going to talk about the beginning literacy framework. So it's all about engagement. It's all about daily opportunities to read books of personal interest so our kids really get excited about them. It's just all about having lots of kinds of books to choose from and that sort of thing. In the inclusive classroom, whatever topic we're studying, we can make it more interesting. So for example, when Maggie, I think around grade 4, was studying ancient Egypt, we brought the Boys of One Direction right into the books because that actually engaged Maggie more as well as many of her classmates. They just really enjoyed making these books where you can cut and paste kind of anything on top of anyone. Here's some more examples of this book called Kid and Story. You can actually do this with the app, Explain Everything as well. So when they studied Black history, look, there's Harry Styles right in the audience. Here's Harry outside a California mission as a class learns about missions in California. You can see how we can superimpose just about any image we want over any photograph and just make these hilarious books. We're going to work on our kids' alphabet knowledge because what we're really trying to do is develop very strong associations between all those random arbitrary letter shapes, those 3 lines that together form the letter A. We need to really associate that abstract knowledge, really anchor it in what the child most cares about. So if the child cares about apples and Andrew and Alexis, then that's what we need to associate A with. There's all kinds of ways that we can use word walls and alphabet books to really teach our kids to pay attention to that initial letter, because the first letter is actually one of the most important letters in a whole word. And we'll talk more about the word wall stuff in that letter instruction tomorrow. Initial letter cueing is when kids just start to get that first letter. So the child who can say drink and then indicate the letter L, or sign people and then indicate the letter A. That's initial letter cueing. So they're learning how to give a little bit of context and then a letter in order to very efficiently communicate a specific word without having to navigate an entire communication system. Alphabet books are absolutely awesome, and there's a whole bunch of ways that we also make even word videos. We need to get kids writing. We'll talk more about writing tomorrow. For phonemic and phonetic awareness, some of the most fun things we can do is things like, so phonemic and phonetic awareness are the ability to hear sounds in words, hear where sounds sound the same. So for example, Alex and Andrew start with the same sound. We can do that with alliterative phrases such as, Alex and Andrew at the aquarium. So making alliterative phrases about, or tongue twisters about the people they care most about doing entertaining things. We can play what's called the Alphabet Action Man game. So this is as simple as having magnetic letters or one of those preschool letter toys that just has all the letters on it, that when you touch a letter it says the letter name out loud. The child hits J. Alphabet Action Man means we need to choose an activity that starts with that letter. So the child hits the letter J and we all go, Josh touch J, let's jump. And we jump up and down. or, you know, Josh touched J, so let's come up with 2 options of what J could stand for. So maybe, I don't know, jiggle and jump, and we leave it up to Josh to tell us which one he wants the whole group to do. I mean, you can see how engaging that would be for so many of our kids to have that ability to sort of control the actions of all the people around them. We can go on letter hunts where we just look all around the house for anything that starts with that letter. And we take pictures of it or we collect it and then we make a book. So if we were on a letter hunt for the word P, we might find pencil and paper and plants and take pictures of it, and now we've made a letter book about all the things that are in our house or in our classroom that that start with that letter. And otherwise, phonemic and phonetic awareness is its own webinar. We'll get into more of that later. We need to start working with words, which means really teaching kids how letters work, how we, you can put 2 letters together, such as A and M, and it spells am, and if we switch it around, it spells ma, and see how we change the sounds of language by changing the orders of letters. And I'll talk about more in the next webinar that we're recording tomorrow on how to really engage in this in a strategic way, so that as we're learning a child's communication system, we're really targeting words like am, doing our word study on them, writing books with them, and kind of bringing it all together in a cohesive way. Sorry, we're just starting to run out. Systematic Sequential Phonics is a general education phonics program developed by Patricia Cunningham. In that curriculum I showed you from Don Johnston, the Early Literacy Starters, Karen Erickson has adapted systematic sequential phonics to make scripted, very specific lessons designed for our kids. So all we're trying to get at here is really making sure the kids are getting instruction in letter names, letter sounds, and how words work, so that they can really start learning how to both encode and decode words. We'll have much more specific examples in the next webinar, because we combine the word study with writing and communication. Here's some examples of alphabet books. If you want Maggie to pay attention to the letter H, then you need to know that H is for Harry. M is for me, Maggie, and Maisie. And we can really see our kids' growth in areas like this. So when we do things like predictable chart writing with Maggie, she'll sit in class and she'll see an M and she'll go, "Mum, mum, ma." And we say, "Yes, we know. M is for Maggie." And she'll touch herself for M is for Maggie. I always try to remind her that M is also for Mama. She doesn't seem nearly as excited by that as she is for the fact that M is for Maisie. So she's made this connection that M is a really important letter. It's not surprising that it's the first letter that she's learned how to write, because it's kind of a physically simple one, but it's also the first letter in her name, right? So here's how we really just draw attention to the letters that are most important to the child to start with, and anchor that letter instruction in the things they care the most about. Here's Maggie's some pages from the alphabet book they made for ancient Egypt. I mean, I think she has a year's worth of alphabet books at school. As they explore a new topic, they just write a new book. And we often have kids in the class, you know, be word detectives. Be always thinking about what words you can add. And if you want to add a page to Maggie's book, maybe you write S is for sarcophagus, but then you also have to write a sentence defining what a sarcophagus is. So bodies were buried in a sarcophagus. And the kids go type that in. They've just reinforced their own knowledge of the word, and Maggie has just gotten a book of it. I don't know if this will play, but this is just an example of a video book. So Maggie has a lot of visual impairment and is highly engaged by books we make in video. This is a book we made in an app that only costs $3. It's called Explain Everything. It lets you make basically a video out of anything. And this is her and book. Oops. And you can see how the app lets you use this laser pointer to draw attention to the text. We know that kids who are beginning readers, the first words that they learn how to read, the first words that kids learn how to recognize, the first words that make them go, oh my gosh, I can recognize words, I know that word, tends to be names. And I see this even more in our kids with Angelman who are just so social, that books that really feature the people around them are just much more meaningful. So, you know, who cares about the word and? It's just a random sight word unless we realize that and is what brings the people I care the most about together. And is this really powerful word because and is how I go from being just me to me and my sister and my friend Jordan, and just how rich that is. So this is the kind of word study, the kind of emphasis on words that we just really want to do with our kids to help them learn that text is powerful, that it's personally meaningful, that reading is something that they can participate in, and something they really want to be part of. The last page in this book, I'll go ahead and increase it because it's Maggie's favorite page. I think I said that wrong. So something we'll cover tomorrow is how to use closed maze procedures to, after we've studied the word and we've used it in the child's communication system, we've used it in books, we've created all these books that have used it, we've said to the child with Angelman, you are responsible for reading the word and, you know how to find it on your communication system. When you see the word and, read it. When the child has gotten through all those stages and is really showing this awareness, this recognition of the word, kind of the next step is using some closed maze where we might cover the word and in the book and offer on sticky notes or in the app Clicker Connect, I love Clicker Connect for this, offer other words and see if they can consistently select the right one, but still in a context. So with a familiar book where we have Maggie and Ella, we can replace and with at, with am, with as, a three-letter word such as any, and just see if the child selects the right word in various assessment procedures. And once they can do it in a closed maze, that's actually our best indication that they can read it. We'll cover that in a little more depth tomorrow. I just wanted to throw it out there. This is an example of an alliterative sentence book. So all the kids in class made their own little illustration and made an alliterative sentence about their own name. They thoroughly enjoyed this. They made that in the app Explain Everything. So our kids with Angelman, our students with Angelman, they need a lot of books. They also need books at multiple levels to read for different purposes. And I know I'm over time, but I'll do about 5 minutes on this and then we'll wrap up. Don Johnston convened a group of researchers to figure out what to do about the fact that our kids who are beginning readers who have moved up the grades, maybe they're in a 4th grade class, maybe they're in an 8th grade class, they've moved up the grades but they still have a very early level of literacy development, and so the only options for their books tended to be those cat who sat on the mat and ate the rat kind of early readers, and that didn't seem to be leading to conventional literacy for those kids. So what do we need to do about it? So Karen Erickson led that group, and they developed what they call a beginning literacy framework so that teachers could think about how to make sure that all of our kids get 3 levels of text. So the first level of text is an enrichment text. This is, we do this all the time. We know that our kids with Angelman, of all the books that they get access to, enrichment texts are probably the most common. Enrichment texts are storybooks. They're the books that we read for enjoyment. They're the books that are on a specific topic that teach our kids about the world, that develop their imagination, that develop their vocabulary. We call these enrichment texts. These are books that are beyond our students' reading level. We read them out loud to our kids, and it's what teaches them that books are interesting, that books are personally meaningful, that they want to be part of books. And they have a plot, they have a story, they have something that takes our child out of their own head and into some other experience. Transitional text are books that are at a simpler reading level. So if you compare a transitional text to an enrichment text, the transitional text looks easier. If you think of something like Dr. Seuss's Hop on Pop, where there's all these rhyming words and all these repeated sentence lines. If you think of Brown Bear, that's a classic transitional text. They appear easier, but we're actually putting more demands on the student with them because they're not just sitting there listening to the book. They're actually being asked to participate in the reading process. So they've got repeated lines, predictable text, there's rhymes, there's visuals, so we're putting more demands on the student. So it looks harder. So for example, as we're reading Brown Bear, what do you see? I see we're asking our child to read in their head. We're asking our child with Angelman to touch the words. We're asking them to look at their communication device and see if they can tell us, what do you see? I see a red bird looking at me, right? So there's more demands on them because they really have to pay attention at the word level. But in a transitional text, they have things such as visuals. So as you turn the pages of Brown Bear, you see a brown bear, you see a red bird. So you see these really high frequency words like I see a, but you also have a really strong support to help with the harder words, the less frequent words such as red bird looking at me. So that's a transitional text, and our kids who are at emergent levels, they need lots of exposure, lots of reading of transitional text so that they can start participating in the reading process. You can rewrite all of those early childhood transitional texts. So if it's no longer age considerate to read a book like Brown Bear, maybe you keep that at home, and in the classroom we read Harry, who do you see? I see Liam looking at me. Liam, who do you see? I see Niall looking at me, right? So we can rewrite these. We can rewrite them with all the kids in the class. So we're teaching our child with Angelman the names of all the kids in class, and we're using photos, but we're using that same sentence frame, that same really predictable text. And what we're looking for is for kids to have that experience of, I can read a book, I can learn a book, I can pretend to read a book to someone else. There's a developmental stage where typical kids will take a book, line up their dolls or their stuffy animals and pretend to read the book to them. They'll pretend to read a book to their baby sister or their grandmother or their dad. And they've memorized the book and they believe they read it. And we're trying to figure out how to get our kids with Angelman to experience that same thing. So we create these books, we read them repeatedly, we make them personally engaging, and then we can do things like put them on the iPad in an app like Pictello and give them voice output so that our children can actually practice reading out loud. And we can do things while they're reading the books like, you touch the words and I'll read the words as you touch them so I know where to go, so that we're really drawing our kids' attention to the words and giving them agency in the reading process. And then the third level of text looks really easy. That's a conventional text. So sort of one of Maggie's first conventional texts was maybe that And book that I just showed you, where it's things that she knows, words of students she knows. We're actually asking her to read the book. In a conventional text, it will look very easy, but it's actually putting the most demands on the student because they actually have to look at each word. And what's really lovely about that Dawn Johnston Start to Finish Literacy Starter series is they've given you these exemplar texts so that all those leveled readers, you've got one at each level, so that you can see for yourself kind of what these different levels might look like. And conventional texts tend to use a lot of high frequency words. For example, there's a book series on volcanoes where the first book is much more of a storybook about volcanoes. The transitional text has a lot of repeated lines about hot, burning lava, hot, burning volcano, right? So lots of repeated lines, and then the conventional text is really just mostly those really high frequency words. So that as our kids are learning how to read, it's things like, I think it's something like hot, run, because it's a story about a volcano. Lastly, our students with Angelman need to be able to physically access their books. So we just need to make sure that they aren't being held up by all the fine motor demands. So these are some examples of what we call page fluffers. Page fluffers are anything we do that creates a gap between the pages so that you don't have to have really strong motor skills to turn the pages. We can put books directly onto their iPad. So for example, this is just in the app Go Talk Now. You can put each page of the book as a scene display, and all the child has to do is touch the page or touch the words, and the book gets read to them. We can make video books. This is that same app, Explain Everything. Oops. What's really lovely about this app is that you can cut things out and basically make a screencast like this webcast. So the child cut out the main character, she's moving it through the book, and she's making a very accessible book because it's actually in a video format. A lot of teachers love this app because they can teach the kids in the class to read the book, really making sure that they're keeping that laser pointer on each word as they read it. And you can use this app. It's used in the iPad Literacy Project for reading fluency, for assessing our kids' errors in reading, that kind of stuff. So the typical kids in class can make books like this that are then highly accessible to our kids with Angelman, and you can imagine they love it. I'm just going to show you the next page because this is where the little girl discovers a feature of the app that got her excited. And if you pinch, so that's the app Explain Everything. It's just a really easy way to make an accessible book. I know I referenced this curriculum earlier, but the Don Johnson Start to Finish Literacy Starters is the most research-based curriculum I've seen that takes everything we know about comprehensive literacy instruction in the general education context and applies it to our kids with disabilities as significant as Angelman. So it just gives you a starting point and a curriculum and readers that are completely age appropriate and kind of topic considerate for older students. For a beginning student with Angelman, you could do them anywhere starting from maybe 2nd grade until 12th grade. They're just really lovely. Last point I'll make is that our students with Angelman, we really need to apply what we know about reading comprehension to when we're reading with them. So what we know about reading comprehension is that we need to provide students with a purpose for listening. And I find that we need to provide our students with Angelman for a purpose for listening to a lot more than just books. So we're sitting down at the circle and we're listening so that we know what we're going to do next. We're listening so that you can ask a question. We're listening to this book so that you can show us your favorite part. You're listening so you can show us a bad part. You're listening so you can find something to share with Ella sitting next to you. You're listening for this word, and maybe we hold up an apple because we know there's an apple in the book. You're listening for this word, and we give them something tangible that they're listening for. But we need to give them a purpose for listening, and when they get distracted, we need to bring them back to it, back to their purpose. We know with the research on listening comprehension that we can enhance it if we've really anchored whatever we're studying in the personal experience of the student. And then we have them so that they're activating their own background knowledge. So if we're reading about animals, we need to talk about animals first. If they're going to listen to a book to tell us their favorite part, then we're going to review some other things that they've done where we know where their favorite part was. So we've really made that concept of listening for your favorite part obvious, and then we'll listen to the book and they'll tell us the favorite part. So this is the kind of stuff that the paraprofessional might do with the student before a whole gen ed lesson, but it's also just simply good instruction, right? I mean, every general educator knows how to first activate background knowledge before launching into a new lesson. We give our kids a really specific purpose to listen for, and we constantly redirect their attention to that purpose. And something that works really well for a bunch of our kids is we need to provide them a response method. So you're listening so you can tell us your favorite part. Now they need to be able to tell us when they get to their favorite part. And it can be as simple as sticky notes, where you've just got some sticky notes, and when you find a part you like, we're going to put a sticky note on that page so that we can find your favorite part. Well, I mean, there's kids who will put 20 sticky notes into a book. There's kids who will put 3. There's kids who will put 1. If they put more than 1 sticky note in, then we review the pages with the sticky notes and see, is that your favorite part? Because you've got a lot of favorite parts here. If they're not listening, if this doesn't make any sense to them yet, that's okay, because if we're reading and they laugh, then we say, is that it? Let's put a sticky note there because you laughed. I think that might have been your favorite part. And so we can teach them how to find it. But literally, it can be as easy as sticky notes. So we need to activate their background knowledge. So for example, there was a writing activity. Maggie was going to be writing with the alphabet about all the things that she did this summer, and so they just flipped through her iPad camera roll, found some pictures of things they did, and then brainstormed some of the words that she might be thinking of that would go with that activity. And it was interesting that when she then sat down to write after doing this, she actually typed a whole bunch of S's. So here they'd identified 3 letters, G, B, and S, that kind of most spoke to the picture that she had selected of what she did over the summer. And she then typed a series of S's with U's and A's. And you can really see the logical connection there. So, and I think that is about as much as we can do because I've gone so far over time. The next webinar that we're recording it tomorrow is hopefully going to bring all of this together around communication support, but combining it with predictable chart writing and word study, and it'll make more sense once you see it. I know it's very short notice, but there's a conference next week in Phoenix, Arizona, with Dr. Carolyn Musselwhite, Dr. Gretchen Hanser, and myself, covering all this. So it's 3 days of this rather than trying to pack all of this into 1 hour on a webinar. We also have a Facebook group called Angelman Literacy and Education where I think we're up to almost 2,000 people. The website Practical AAC named us as one of the top 5 Facebook groups because of all of our talk about communication and literacy support in the inclusive classroom. And what matters most is I know this was a lot of information packed into 90 minutes, but you don't have to climb the staircase all at once. We're just looking for the first step. So just take one idea from this if that's helpful, and just try to do one thing. And that's it.
All right, thank you, Erin. We actually didn't have any questions that came through. So if anybody has any, oh no, we just got one. Hold on. All right, so my daughter will start kindergarten this year, and if the general education teacher is using another curriculum, how could we add the start to finish to the curriculum already being used?
I mean, honestly, kindergarten is comprehensive literacy instruction. I would say at that stage, you don't need to worry about an external curriculum, because what you'll see happening in any kindergarten classroom is lots of alphabet instruction, lots of alphabet books, lots of associating letters with all the things we care about, lots of emphasis on the children's names, lots of emphasis on rhyme and reading. What's really beautiful about the start to finish curriculum is that if our kids get older, they've gone through kindergarten, they've gone through first grade, now they're in a general education setting where we're not doing all that anymore. We're assuming kids have already learned rhyme, we're assuming they've already learned all their letters, and now we're trying to continue that instruction. That's where I would bring in the start to finish literacy starters. But kindergarten is gorgeous. Kindergarten is all about emergent literacy. What I would be more interested in is if the teacher does things such as predictable chart writing. And we'll talk about that more tomorrow, but that is, predictable chart writing is a general education strategy that is so valuable for our kids. We can do years of it. So if I was going to ask a kindergarten teacher anything, I would ask them if they do predictable chart writing. And there's, if you simply Google it, there's a book by Patricia Cunningham, and we'll talk about it a lot in the next webinar that's being recorded tomorrow.
All right, perfect. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everybody again for attending. If you do have any questions that you think of later on, you can go ahead and shoot them over to us at info@angelman.org, and we'll get them over to Erin to answer for us. Thank you again, and Erin, thank you so much. And hopefully we will see you guys tomorrow. The webinar is at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Erin.